Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also donate to support this work. If you find this valuable, please like and share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts. It is not an easy thing to consistently write and talk and read and research and listen to the people who are suffering in Gaza. It is a hell of a lot easier than actually being one of those people. So, um, it is also not an easy thing to deny a genocide that is so blatantly being carried out and publicized in real time, so that people can actually watch to see what's going on. And yet, the active denial of this genocide is massive. Um, and even though I think, just judging by the responses of people in polls, in just, in the sort of zeitgeist and online fora, just looking at all of that, not just in the United States, but around the world, I think most people know what's going on, or at least have some idea of what's going on in Gaza. The narrative of denial is still very powerful, and clearly resonates well enough for people in leadership in Washington, in London, in Brussels, in Berlin. It resonates enough there so that they can continue to support Israel, um, regardless of the fact that most of their citizens know what's going on and want it to stop. It has gotten worse in recent weeks. For more than 80 days, Israel has absolutely blocked virtually all food, from reaching people in Gaza. They have shut down the international mechanism for aid distribution, which at one time included 400 distribution points throughout the strip, and have reduced it to 4 points, most of them in the southernmost area of Gaza, which are essentially killing zones. People go there, dozens, every time that people mass there waiting for aid. Every time they hear that aid is available, people go, of course, because they're starving, line up, and dozens are shot every time. Scores are shot every time. With sometimes the killing reaches triple figures, the injured, countless at this point. Um, and this is essentially sport for the IDF soldiers there and for the American mercenaries who work for the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which cannot help but bring to mind the Nazi signs above their death camp that said "Work will set you free." It is that Orwellian. And the fact is that the genocide in Gaza has gotten that cruel, that such comparisons, I have always been loath to make such comparisons, not because there aren't some ways to compare what Israel has done, to certainly the early days of the Nazi regime in the 1930s, before the camps opened, before, certainly years before the final solution and all of that. I have been loath to make that comparison, even where you could make it, just because it's controversial and it distracts the conversation. At this point, anyone supporting this has no moral high ground to object to any comparisons or rhetoric. By the same token, I don't love, sort of angry, rage-filled denunciations. When I heard the Bobby Villain, at the now infamous Glastonbury Music Festival, and he chanted "Death, death to the IDF." That's not my style. I don't like it. I don't think it's particularly productive. But if you're getting bent out of shape over that, first of all, my objection to that is not in any way sort of moral or any of that. It's simply a tactical one. I just don't find it to be useful. I find it, I find it to be something that just, it riles people up who already agree with you, sometimes into counterproductive action, and certainly does not appeal well to people who don't already agree with you, who are on the fence or any of that. So, that's a tactical objection, really, more than anything else. It makes me personally uncomfortable. It's not my style, but if that's what you're getting worked up about, while babies are literally starving to death, something really wrong with you. Something really, really wrong with you. And there's a lot of people apparently that there's something really, really wrong with. We are talking now about a level of intentional starvation that is just it is mind-boggling. To do it to an entire population, to willfully, I mean, it's one thing when you think about sort of the famines in Ukraine, Lithuania, during the early days of the Stalin regime, the killing fields out there, and all of that led to. Even that wasn't anything like the extent of the man-made starvation that's being imposed on people in Gaza. This idea that there is food in Gaza is absurd. How did it get there, do you think? Um, there are these distribution sites, and very little food is even allowed in. What is allowed in past the checkpoints, as we've seen recently, is stopped because the Israeli army will not allow safe passage for those trucks, hundreds of trucks that are sitting there, even some that have passed into Gaza through the checkpoints. But the Israeli army, whether are using red tape or just denial or whatever it may be, to prevent those trucks from having any routes to deliver that aid. And we saw recently that a World Food Program truck that had passed all the checkpoints was fired upon by the Israeli army. And that was reported by the head of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain, who, if you think she's making up stories to make Israel look bad, you don't know much about Cindy McCain and her history, or her husband, the late Senator John McCain. The images that I'm seeing out of Gaza now are new and different. And I have been watching, I have refused to look away from the images that I've seen. And I know that there are always deep fakes, and one can always say this was AI generated. Listen, most of us can tell the difference between an AI and a real picture, but also I know many of the sources that are sending out these pictures. Many of them are confirmed by professional journalists with reputations to protect. Many of them are sent out by reputable news organizations, reputable humanitarian organizations. Babies that are literally skin and bones. Children that look like babies because they can't grow. The images are horrific. And this is after months of seeing mutilations of civilians, of adults, of children that are unspeakable. Because that's what genocide looks like. It's gotten bad enough that you have, right-wing publications in the UK putting pictures of starving, literally skin and bones babies on their front page and saying, for pity's sake, this has got to stop. These are right-wing, pro-Israel kinds of newspapers. The only place it really hasn't reached is the United States, where even though there's been some more objective reporting, and it's gotten a little better in recent months from places like CNN and MSNBC, it's nothing. It doesn't begin to show what's happening in Gaza. And people, who rely on those sources for news, well, they shouldn't. But they're definitely not getting the picture. It's not only a failure of the mainstream media, though, of course. There is an entire industry right now that's devoted to denying the Gaza genocide. And it's an industry that builds on the global propaganda industry that Israel has imposed is the wrong word, that Israel has established over many years to promote their narrative. And it's been very effective. I mean, we have many professional marketers, but it also depends a lot on people who are it's just pro-Israel advocates who literally volunteered their time to be, to go online to the various social media outlets, sometimes to do more than that and to speak in various venues, and some of them even on major TV networks. Um, Literally the other day, I saw Piers Morgan, who has reversed who's still a nasty right winger and still doesn't appreciate the full scope of what is going on in Gaza and the monstrousness of Israel's campaign, but has definitely changed his stance. And has realized that something really, really bad is happening. But he had on a pro-Israel advocate who just simply said, "There's no one starving in Gaza." Funny how, just in the last week, over 115 people are now dead from starvation, and that is only the ones that you can directly attribute, that you can directly say they starved to death. Many other people who may be wounded, who may be ill, may have chronic conditions, who may be elderly or young, they may have died from some other cause that wasn't actually starvation, but that was aggravated by a lack of food and a lack of nutrition. And yet we have here this, many of them very, sort of young, good. They tend to be young and good looking, advocates for Israel. Some Israelis, some not. Um, most most of them Jewish. Um, for obvious reasons. This helps to promote the notion that criticism of Israel is all anti-Semitic, which is nonsense. Um, and they're just simply going on and saying this isn't happening. Don't believe your lying eyes, essentially. Um, there was for a long time sort of cottage industry of Holocaust denial that was rightly condemned throughout the world. There are, of course, still people who continue to deny the Nazi Holocaust. Um, but one of the most striking things about the Gaza genocide is that it is happening in real time. It is there for everyone to see. When the Nazis did the unspeakable things that they did, people could not see them directly. They weren't being broadcast. We see films now. Those films were not being shown at the time. They were shown after. The Nazis were meticulous record keepers and were apparently proud of their genocidal actions, and I guess felt it was the right thing to do. And they documented a great deal of what they did, which is one of the reasons that the Holocaust denial industry failed so miserably, because the documentation was right there. But they weren't broadcasting it at the time. Now, that's not to say maybe that there were certainly people in Europe that should have known, people in Poland, people in Germany. But outside of that, you can only get the stories. You weren't getting images, and it was hard for people to believe what was going on. And I understand that it's hard for people to believe what Israel's doing. That level of monstrosity is very, very hard to wrap your mind around, but it is what's happening. This denial has been part of the problem, and it's been part of everything that's happened in Palestine and Israel since October the 7th. Of course, denial has been part of this process from the beginning. People say, the myth of Israel having the most moral army in the world, which is just sheer nonsense. And the notion that the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza was somehow benevolent, and that Palestinians, all left in 1948 on their own because they were told to, and were never driven out by any Israeli soldiers because Zionists would not do that. So it's been there a long time, but since October 7th, there's been, a sort of industry, again, an industry, but an elaborate system that includes, very much has included the United States government, of propaganda and denial. And that stretches all the way up to Joe Biden talking about, Hamas beheading babies on October 7th, when that was not true. His own people said it was not true, and yet he stuck to the story. Um, one can talk about that being an example of his senility, but it's a rather radical one if that's the case, and an outlier in as being much worse than the rest of his apparent senility in those days. I mean, denial is not strictly, an Israeli and a pro-Israel thing. I mean, the Hamas, many people have romanticized Hamas. They're the resistance, which is a label I think is really unfortunate because it erases the massive uh, and diverse ways Palestinians resist and have resisted Israeli colonialism, Israeli apartheid, and yes, Israeli genocide in every way they could for decades. Uh, Not just in this genocide, but have always done that. Sometimes in violent ways, sometimes in nonviolent ways. But it also erases the fact that what happened on October 7th was a major war crime, and to not acknowledge that is to simply not deal with reality. The targeting of civilians, the clear and willful. This is on film. You can watch the Al Jazeera documentary, which I think is excellent, which uses Hamas's own videos that shows what Hamas did on that day. That there were clearly just horrendous crimes against civilians that are inexcusable and not justified by the right of an occupied people to resist, which Palestinians absolutely have. That romanticization of Hamas helps no one. Um, that's not to say that it's not to say that there isn't also a massive effort that has been very successful to demonize Hamas and to make Hamas, to take the fact that Hamas, yes, committed horrible war crimes not only on October 7th, but have done so before in targeting civilians, but to then say once we know they've done that, then we can attribute every villainous and horrible motivation to them. And so that extends to saying, that, oh, all of this, Hamas did this intentionally. And even today, I just saw something today that purported that Hamas loves the fact that Gazans are starving and everyone can see it. Hamas does not love this fact. It's not good. If you want to just be cynical about it, it's not good for them and their position. None of this has been. Hamas was in a much if Hamas was only interested in itself, Hamas was in a much stronger position before October 7th. They are continuing to lose support among Palestinians because of the things that have been brought onto Gaza. And the fact is, they're not doing very much. They're not able to do very much at this point to resist Israel. So what do they get out of this? This is even on the most cynical basis, but also Hamas is part of Palestine, like them or dislike them, and I am not too crazy about them, but they are part of the fabric of Palestinian society, and not every Hamas member is part of their militant wing. So there's a lot there that has been distorted all over. So the notion of denial is not good for anyone. There are many things about October 7th that are still up in the air. The question, the question has been again, raised about the extent of the sexual assaults, which, from based on the UN investigations, certainly did happen. The testimonies of some of the freed hostages show that there were abuses of the captives. They also these investigations show that there were sexual assaults, but were they systematic? Were they as widespread as claimed? There's a new report out from the Dina Project, which simply goes back over already some discredited and some already known evidence that does not prove these things, claims it does, and even goes further to try and allege genocide, that genocide was actually committed against Israel, without exploring at all what's happening in Gaza right now. I mean, this kind of attitude is not good, and it's not good from either side. There needs to be, certainly from us who are outside of this, there needs to be a sense of justice. There needs to be a sense of rules that apply to all. Part of those rules, incidentally, is the fact that an oppressed and occupied people have the right to resist their occupiers. There are rules of how they can carry out that resistance. They can't simply do anything by virtue of the fact that they're occupied and oppressed. But it's all part of the same fabric of dishonesty. That being said, this this denial of October 7th pales, absolutely pales before the global effort to deny the Gaza genocide. What Israel's advocates are painting is this notion that there is a global conspiracy that includes every human rights group, a great many Jews who, like myself, have been calling this a genocide from the beginning and have been demanding that it stop. It includes the United Nations. It includes the governments of not only many Muslim countries, but also countries like Ireland, Spain, Brazil, anyone who says anything critical about Israel. So now it's probably also going to include France, possibly even the UK. There is this just amazingly vast conspiracy to make Israel look bad by accusing it of genocide. I mean, when you actually consider what it is that pro-Israel advocates are arguing, it is so absurd. It is so crazy. It would be a comic book if there was anybody, if to anybody who's looking at this from the outside, and it will probably look just that absurd to history. They are alleging a conspiracy so vast and so widespread that it makes the global anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy theories look at least as reasonable as this. I mean, we are talking about a genocide that is being documented. It's not only being documented, by the way, by Palestinians. We have Israeli soldiers who have posted humiliating Palestinians, shooting at Palestinian civilians, destroying Palestinian churches and mosques, and mocking Palestinian victims, talking about wiping out the Palestinians. From the beginning of this, we had, Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the Palestinians were Amalek, and Amalek is the people that attacked the Jews from behind in the desert, in the Torah story. And God commanded the Israelites to wipe out Amalek forever. That includes everybody, women, children, pets, slaves, everybody that had any connection to Amalek, that are all to be wiped out. Well, when that's what you're calling this entire race of people, that is literal genocide talk. You can't get more genocidal. And it's exactly the way many, not all, many Israeli soldiers have responded. And, there are Israeli soldiers who have spoken about what's actually gone on. Again, not many, but there are some. Even some Americans. And recently, an American soldier was so disgusted by what he saw both the Israelis and his own comrades doing at these so-called humanitarian fund distribution sites that he spoke out and talked about it. But the denial all comes from this notion that the Palestinians are somehow putting all of this out and are enlisting the United Nations and human rights organizations. These are, let's remember, these are organizations that whose entire function is investigating these things. They know how to find fakes and do it all the time. I can tell you, as somebody who worked for B'Tselem, they do it all the time. They find things that are either, they find out that they're not true, or they find out that there isn't enough evidence to sustain the accusation, and it goes nowhere. You don't hear about those things, which is why they can say that, oh, they just are faking this, or they don't know what they're doing. It's not true. Um, the the notion is that what we're seeing is simply falsified, and that would require not only all of the people that I just named being involved, but also all of these volunteer doctors and relief workers from from some Arab countries, from Latin American countries, and also from European and North American, United States and Canada countries. Um, are all saying what they're saying in Gaza. There's no contradiction. Nobody's coming back from Gaza and saying these things that you're saying the Israelis are doing, they're not doing. They're the ones that are telling us. We have surgeons telling us they operate on children who come in with wounds in the same place for a day or a few days, and then in another place, but a whole group again that are shot in another place on their bodies days later as a group. So they're being targeted. It's a game. You have to hit the boy here. I don't see how anyone thinks that that is anything other than genocide. We also have Israeli ministers who go and literally say it, right up to the prime minister, who literally say, they want to see Gaza emptied of Palestinians. Benjamin Netanyahu says, well, we want to give them the choice to leave. We want to give them their free choice, like President Trump says. Well, what he's saying is we're going to starve them. We're going to pen them in to concentration camps in the south of Gaza. And then we'll say, if you want to stay, stay. If you want to leave, you can also leave. That is not a free choice. That is ethnic cleansing. Okay. That is, in fact, genocide. Genocide is the crime of emptying a place of its inhabitants based on their ethnicity. That is, and their peoplehood. Israel has matched the definition of genocide literally from day one in a way that almost never happens in genocide. It's true that a legal finding of genocide can pretty much never be determined, or pretty close to never be determined, until after the genocide's over. All the other genocides that has been true of, including the Holocaust. But certainly the ones that have happened since there's been these genocide conventions. But there's never been a genocide like this one, where it's documented so well in real time, or one that's ever been so brazenly declared by the ministers of the government that's carrying it out. Most recently we saw the Minister of Heritage of Israel from the Otzma Yehudit party, Amichai Eliyahu, literally say we're going to empty Gaza. Literally, we're going to make it entirely Jewish. I mean, he's literally saying we're going to force everyone out or kill them all, and then it's going to be, it's not in his mind, not settlements, new Israeli towns. Israel will simply, it'll be empty. Israel will annex it and build new Israeli cities and towns there. There's nothing you can call that aside from genocide, and it cannot be something that we willingly turn away from. Now, there are all other real issues that we need to tackle because of this, because there is at this point, I think, a clear majority, certainly in Europe, and I think in the United States as well, that recognizes that this is at the very least something we want no part of supporting. What the polls say. Yet governments, not only ours, but also the European ones, continue to support Israel. They continue to do business with Israel as if it's normal, despite the fact that these are horrid violations of certainly agreements that Israel has with the EU. And the EU has just reaffirmed that they will do nothing about that, even though they're not denying that it is true that that these are violations of their trade agreements. Not confirming it, but they're not denying it. That disconnect between what the people see and what the people want and what governments are doing is something we really need to look at very, very seriously. The fact that our governments can, against our will, continue to support genocide is intolerable. How can we tolerate? That's a big problem. But the bigger problem is how many people are out there turning away, ignoring it, getting on with their lives, making it out like there's nothing going on. Well, those people aren't looking. They are not seeing and they are not hearing. The children, the women, and the men of Gaza who are being slaughtered every single day and being tortured to death en masse by starvation. It is a horrifying thing. And it's horrifying to look at. And it's hard. Believe me, I know. I've been doing it since October 7th, and I've been doing this work for almost 30 years. I know how hard it is to look at this. We have to look at it, and we have to do something about it. If this doesn't move you, if the starvation of children, and let's remember, there may well be hundreds of thousands of children in Gaza who survived this genocide, who survived this starvation, but they will forever be damaged physically and emotionally for the rest of their lives. Their lives are never going to be the same. When you are starved as a baby or as a toddler or even as a young child, that has lifelong effects. It's not the same as it is for adults. It has lifelong effects on your development, on your brain. This isn't just happening today. This is something that's going to resonate for generations, and we're going to all have to live with it. Israelis, too, are going to have to live with it. And what the next generation of Palestinians will be dealing with is something we will all have to live with. The consequences of the Gaza genocide is something we all have to live with. But most of all, if you can look at these images and not recognize that it is something that you have to do something about, it has to change, you have no humanity. And I don't think that's true of all that many people. I think that's why so many of you have to look away. And it's time you stopped and looked at it and felt what you need to feel about this, because it's the only way that never again can finally come to mean something, because it's being made a mockery of right now by the state of Israel. I will leave it there. Please like, subscribe, share this if you can. And again, if you can support this work, we really do need it. It really helps. And it allows more of this work to happen. We're hoping to be able to do more expansion, having panels, possibly even having live feeds. I'm looking at all of that, but we need the resources to be able to do that. So if you can donate, if you can support this work, please do so. And I will be talking to you soon.